in the morning, and on Pampa were early morning people. She cooked us breakfast, and we went to church. We went to Emmanuel Baptist Church there on Leggett Stockton, in West Washington, in West Charleston. And Mama was singing in the choir today, for that day. Pampa was dressed like a king. We piled in his big Buick Roadmaster. God, he loved big Buicks and Jeeps. He loved Jeeps. And we went to church. I sat there. I had on my little suit and tie that they gave me for Christmas. And we attended church. We came home after church. I put on my play clothes. And I'll fix us lunch. I think I laid down and took a nap, like any little kid. Then I went out in the afternoon, say about 3 o'clock or whatever, to play. Played with my next door neighbor's dog, tossing the ball back and forth. Typical 6-year-old. About dusk, I noticed that a full-dressed in Army military uniform came to Mama's and Pampa's. Now, I noticed during the day that he constantly spending time on that dial-up telephone. So I noticed this Army officer, and he went in. After 63 years, I figured out, with the help of Mr. Edwards there, who that officer was. Keep in mind this name because I'm going to tell you a story at the very end. When you deliver a presentation, the traditional Army style, you tell people what you're going to tell them, then you tell them what you told them. Well, I've modified this a little bit, and at the front, before I begin this, what I'll call part 2 here. Part 1 is what you want to do is loosen the crowd up a little bit. Then you deliver the message, and then at the end, you want to lighten the crowd up a little bit. You want them to leave a presentation, even though this one's going to be somewhat solemn, with warm feelings in their heart. Anyway, remember this name, Captain Leonard Bostic, and I'll relate this at the very end. I didn't think anything about it. I was still out there playing with the dog. Papaw came out about 15 minutes later and he said, "Hey, Robert Blair, you want to go for a car ride?" I said, "Sure." I said, "Where are we going, Papaw?" He says, "I'll let you drive around the block." Now what that meant was he let me get in the car, sit behind the steering wheel like the big Buick Roadmaster, pretend I was driving. Of course, it wouldn't be a key in the ignition, the parking brake be set, and safe neighborhood. This was the 50s, and the car was parked right in front of the house. So I went out there and played for a while. I noticed the officer left. I didn't think anything about it. I think I took a nap again. Typical 6-year-old, you gotta have the naps. When I woke up, I noticed there were a lot of people coming to Mama and Papa's door and going in the house. But this wasn't uncommon. It was the Sabbath. They had a lot of visitors. I didn't think anything about it. I played out for another little bit until it got nearly dark. I got out of the car. Walked up on the front porch. There were all sorts of men on the front porch. And I expected to see Papaw there smoking a cigar. He loved his cigars. He wasn't there. One of the men opened the door for me. I walked in. And they had an L-shaped house there on 6th Avenue where you walk in, there's living room, L-shaped, it turns into the dining room, kitchen in the back, stairs on the right where you can go upstairs to the bed. There were all sorts of women in there, ladies. They were crying. Remember, one lady was singing a gospel song. Mama was sitting over right between the living room and the dining room, which was open there. She was in a rocking chair, crying hysterically, rocking back and forth, rocking back and forth, just rocking back. Grandpa standing behind her. I dashed over and I said, "What's wrong, Mama? What's wrong?" She grabbed me and held me in her arms. Grandpa lifted me up, came around to the front of the rocking chair. Lifted me up, put me in her lap. And she said, "Your daddy's not coming home again. He's in heaven." I don't remember anything else the rest of that day. A couple days later, they held a memorial, military service memorial at the Municipal Auditorium in downtown Charleston. It was packed, absolutely packed. And I was sitting with my mother. And I remember them singing in the beginning. I remember saying the Lord's Prayer. And I remember taps at the end. But what I remember most of all, the American flag ready caskets. There were 21 boys. 2 were still alive, but they didn't survive the war. They had 16 caskets, and you can see the pictures on that slideshow that I'll set up here. That Sid found for me. And it just like what I saw. 21 boys were killed eventually, but 2 of them were still alive at that time. There's 16 caskets. 3 wreaths on the left that represent 3 families that decided to have private ceremony instead of the memorial. 2 wreaths on the right represent the boys that were still alive at that time. Oh, I remember those caskets. The flags from the coffin go to the first of kin. Normally the wife or parents if they're unmarried. My mom or I didn't get a flag, but my mother petitioned a member of the legislature. And he went to the Army Air Force, he went to the Reserve. And they presented me with the flag. I still have that flag to this day. It resides in my mother's old cedar chest, right with the pictures. Right with the letters that my dad wrote her during World War II. Still have it to this day. Okay, that's memories of a 70-year-old man when he was 6 years old. Pretty factual. All right, now I want to lighten everybody up, or at least attempt to. Remember the name Leonard Bostic? Captain Leonard Bostic. Leonard Bostic happened to be the father of a great friend of mine and Bill Walton's, a young girl named Betty Bostic. She lives in Seattle now. I've seen her twice in the last 4 years. Okay, a high school reunion. Probably Bill about the same. I dated her in junior high school. Bill dated her in high school. We were always great friends. She taught me how to dance back when I was a teenager. She tried to teach Bill, but basketball players can't dance. They just stumble all over the floor. So anyway, I know who Leonard was because I know him when I dated Betty and whatever. And Leonard Bostic, I knew this, Betty and I both do it. Leonard Bostic and my father flew together. And I knew that, never connected. But Mrs. Bostic, her name was Helen. In fact, Bill Perdue used to date her too, didn't he? Did I get you in trouble,
She got
Karen?
around. She should have.
So, Mrs. Bostic took some sort of special interest in me. She was always asking Betty, how's the little Amy boy? What's he doing? You know, is he doing okay? And you know, I knew there was some kind of interest there. But I never connected Leonard Bostic with being the person that came up and told my grandparents that my father was deceased. And then Sid Edwards, and this is just pure coincidence or it's destiny. Sid found me on the internet about 3 months ago, and Sid's an author. Lives up at Point Pleasant. In fact, he's a historian. He's a good one. And we started communicating back and forth because he's writing a book which should be released later this year. The name of the book is tentatively titled, his book, he'll make his titles and whatever, but it's tentatively titled Native Sons, 21 Lives Left Unfinished. And it's about the crash. And what he's doing is going through and researching the boys that were killed and, you know, doing a chapter on each one or whatever. And he's really digging into historical stuff, and he's making it as accurate as possible. He's also writing in the book about other incidences at the Kenneth-Amick Airport. Well, I'm talking with Betty, and talking to her, I had to call her. A friend of ours recently passed away, David Townsend, who some of you know who David was. I had to let her know about David. And we got to talking, and I said, hey, I'm talking to this guy. He's putting together a book on that. And Betty and I got to talking back and forth. And she said, you know, remember I used to tell you my mom always took a real interest in you? I said, yeah. And anyway, I was talking to Sid maybe a couple days later. I said, Sid, you're doing all this research. Do you know who Captain Leonard Bostic is? He said, oh, yes. And he sent me a draft chapter, one of the first chapters in his book. He didn't know who Betty was. I put them all, you know, we all got connected on the light bulb starts coming on. Betty remembered, even though she was 4 years old, she remembered her dad going up on Sunday, getting in full dress, and saying, I've got to leave and I've got to go do something. My grandparents only lived about 5 miles from him, and my dad, he was friends, so it had to have been Leonard Bostic. Had to. Anyway, I'm talking with Sid, and I said, Captain Leonard Bostic? Oh, yes. He fired off to me immediately one of the chapters in his book, and it's about Leonard Bostic. One of the front chapters. My dad went down on C-47 in 1951. Leonard Bostic crash landed in 1947 in a fighter jet within a half a mile where my father was killed. So that connection that the Bostics has was not just because my father and he were friends. They could truly identify. Leonard Bostic was pulled from the cockpit of the plane. 3 guys drove by. It was off the airport grounds, but they drove by, broke the cockpit open, pulled him out. Broken collarbone, fractured skull, broken arm, severe lacerations and burns. He spent 4 months in the hospital and another year recuperating. And he went back to flying. End of talk. God bless you all for coming. Thank you. I guess it's news time.
Who needs to go to the bathroom?
This slideshow, by the way, shows a bunch of those pictures I talked about. You'll see the pictures of the roll-up or municipal auditorium and caskets. You will see a picture in there of my father standing in front of Steve Harnett.